Hello, everybody. This is The Late Mattia Pascal by Luigi Pirandello. Chapter 3. A Mole Saps Our House. I was a bit hasty in stating a moment ago that I knew my father. I can hardly claim as much. He died when I was 4 years old. He went on a trip to Corsica in a coaster of which he was a captain and owner, and never came back. A matter of typhus, I believe, which carried him off in 3 days at the untimely age of 38. Nevertheless, he left his family well provided for, his wife, that is, and 2 boys, Mattia, that was in my first life, and Roberto, my elder by a couple of years. The old people of our village enjoyed telling a story to the effect that my father's wealth had a rather dubious origin, though I don't see why they continue to hold that up against him, since the property has long since passed from our hands. As they will have it, he got his money at a game of cards with the captain of an English tramp steamer visiting Marseille. The Englishman had taken on a cargo at some port in Sicily, a load of sulphur, it specified, consigned to a merchant in Liverpool. They know all the details, you see. Liverpool. Give them time to think, and they'll tell you the name of the merchant and the street he lived on. After losing to my father the large amount of cash he had on hand, the captain staked the sulphur and again lost. The steamer arrived in Liverpool still further lightened by the weight of its master, who had jumped overboard at sea in despair. Had it not been so well ballasted with the lies of my father's defamers, I dare say the ship would never have reached port at all. Our fortune was mostly in landed property. An adventurer of a roving disposition, my father was utterly unable to tie himself down to a business in one place. With his boat we went around from harbor to harbor, buying here, selling there, dealing in goods of every sort, but to avoid the temptation of too hazardous speculations, he always invested his profits in fields and houses of our native home, intending, I suppose, to settle down there in his old age and enjoy, with his wife and children about him, the fruits of his imagination and hard work. He bought a place called Le Deux Rivières, Shorecrest, as it were, for its olives and its mulberry trees. He bought a farm we called the Coops, with a pond on it, which ran a mill. He bought the whole hillside of the Spur, the best vineyard in our district. He bought the San Rocchino estate, where he built a delightful summer house. In town he bought a mansion where we lived, 2 tenement houses, and the building that had now fixed over the armory. His sudden death was a ruin for us. Utterly ignorant of business matters, my mother was obliged to entrust our fortune to someone. She chose as her steward a man who had been enriched by my father, and who, as anyone would have thought, would be loyal out of sheer gratitude, if for nothing else. All the more since a high salary for his services would make honesty a good policy also. A saintly soul, my mother was. Naturally timid and retiring, as trustful as a child, she knew nothing at all about the world and the people who lived in it. After my father's death, her health was never good, but she didn't complain of her troubles to other people, and I doubt whether she lamented them much in her secret heart. She seemed to take them as natural consequence of great sorrow. The shock of that should have killed her, so she reasoned. Ought she not be thankful, therefore, to the good Lord who had vouchsafed her a few years more of life, be it indeed in pain and suffering, to devote to her children? For us she had an almost morbid tenderness, full of worries and fancied terrors. She would scarcely let us out of her sight for fear of losing us. Let her look up from her work to find one of us absent, and the servants would be sent calling through the great mansion where we lived, the monument to my father's ambition, to bring us back to her side. Merging her whole existence in that of her husband, she felt lost in the world when she was gone. She never left the house except on Sundays, and then only to attend early mass in a church nearby, in company with 2 maids of long service with us, whom she treated as members of the family. Indeed, to simplify her life still further, she lived in 3 rooms of our big house, abandoning the other 2 to the haphazard care of the maids and the pranks of us 2 boys. I can still feel the impressiveness of those mysterious halls and chambers, all pretentiously furnished with massive antiques. The faded tapestries, the upholstering gave off that peculiar odor of mustiness which is the breath, as it were, of ages that have died. More than once I remember I'd look around in strange consternation upon these weirdly silent objects which had been sitting there for years and years, motionless and unused. Among my mother's more frequent visitors was an aunt of mine on my father's side, Scholastica by name, an bilious, irritable old maid, tall, dark-skinned, stern of bearing, with eyes like a ferret. Scholastica never stayed long at any one time. Invariably, her visits ended in a quarrel, which she would settle by stalking out of the house without saying goodbye to anyone and slamming the doors behind her. I was terribly afraid of this redoubtable woman. I'd sit in my chair without daring to stir, gazing at her with wide-opened eyes, especially when she'd fly into a temper, turn furiously upon my mother, and, stamping angrily on the floor, exclaim, "Do you hear that? Hollow, hollow underneath. That mole, that mole." That mole was Battista Malagna, the man in charge of our property, who, according to Scholastica, was boring the ground away beneath our feet. My aunt, as I learned years later, wanted Mother to marry again at all costs. Ordinarily, the relatives of a dead husband do not give advice like this, but Scholastica had a severe and spiteful sense of the fitness of things. Her desire to thwart a thief, rather than any real affection for us, moved her to protest against Malagna's robbing us with impunity. Since Mother was blind to faults in anybody, Scholastica saw no possible remedy except bringing a new man into the house. And she even picked her man, a poor devil, though a rich one, named Girolamo Pomino. Pomino was a widower with one boy. The boy, also a Girolamo, is still living. In fact, he's a friend, I can hardly say a relative of mine, as my story will show in due season. In those days, Girolamino, or Mino as we call him, would come to our house along with his father to be torment of brother Berto and me. Years before, Girolamo Pomino had long aspired to the hand of my aunt Scholastica, but she spurned him, as, for that matter, she had spurned every other offer in marriage. It was not so much her lack of an impulse to love, as she put it. The faintest suspicion on her part that a husband might betray her, even in his thoughts, would drive her to murder. Yes, to murder, downright. And whoever heard of a faithful husband? All males were hypocrites, deceivers, scalawags. Even Pomino? Well, Pomino, no. One exception that proved the rule, but she had found at our too late. Carefully watching all the men who had proposed to her and then married someone else, she had found them in every case playing tricks on their wives, discoveries that afforded her a certain ferocious satisfaction. But Pomino had always been straight. In his case, the woman rather had been to blame. "So why don't you marry him now, Samantha? Oh, dear me, just because he's a widower? Just because there's been a woman in his life, and he may give her a thought now and then that might otherwise have been for you? That's splitting things pretty fine. Besides, just look at him. You can see a mile away that he's in love, and there's no secret about him. He wants, poor man." As though Mother would have ever dreamed of a second marriage, a sacrilege that would have seen in her eyes. I imagine that Mother doubted besides whether Scholastica really meant everything she said. For when my aunt would start one of her long orations on the virtues of Pomino, Mother would just laugh in a peculiar way. The widower was often present at such arguments, and I can remember him hitching about uncomfortably on his chair, as Scholastica would overwhelm him in words of extravagant praise, and trying to relieve his torture by the most wicked of his oaths. The dear Lord save us! Pomino was a dapper little old man with soft blue eyes. Berto and I thought there was just a suggestion of rouge on his cheeks. Certainly he was proud of keeping his hair so late in life, and he took the greatest pains in parting and brushing it. As he talked, he was continually smoothing it with his two hands. I don't know how things would have turned out had Mother, not for her own sake surely, but as a safeguard for the future of her children, taken Aunt Scholastica's advice and married Pomino. Surely nothing could have been worse than continuing with our affairs in the clutches of Malagna, the mole. By the time Berto and I were in long trousers, most of our inheritance had dwindled away, though something was still left, enough to keep us, if not in luxury, at least free from actual need. But we were careless youngsters, with not one serious thought in our heads. Instead of coming to the rescue of the remnants of our fortune, we persisted in the kind of life in which our mother had accustomed us as boys. Never, for example, were we sent to school. We had a private tutor come to the house, a man called Pinzone. The little pointed beard he wore, his real name was Del Cinque, but everyone called him Pinzone, and I believe he grew so used to it that he ended by signing his name that way himself. He was an absurdly tall and an absurdly lean fellow. There was no telling how much taller he might have grown had his head and neck not toppled forward from his shoulders in a stoop that became a real deformity. Another feature was the enormous Adam's apple that went up and down as he swallowed. Pinzone was always biting at his lip, as though chastising a sarcastic little smile peculiar to him. A smile which, banished from his lips, managed to escape through two sharp eyes that ever showed a glittering, mocking twinkle. That pair of eyes must have seen things in our house to which Mother and the two boys were blind. But Pinzone said nothing, perhaps because it was not his place to interfere, or, as I believe more probable, because he took a vindictive pleasure in the thought of us boys being as poor as him some day. For Berto and I ragged him unmercifully. As a rule, he would let us do anything we chose, but then again, as though to ease his conscience, he would tell us at tunes when we least expected. Once, I remember, Mother had asked him to take us to church. It was Easter time, and we were to prepare for confession. Since we were to call at Malagna's house and express our sympathy to Signora Malagna, who was ill, not a very exciting program for two boys our age, and in such fine weather, we were hardly out of our mother's hearing when he proposed a revision of the day's work. We offered Pinzone a fine lunch with wine, provided he would forget church and Mrs. Malagna and go bird-nesting with us in the woods. There was a gleam in his eye, and he accepted. He ate our lunch and didn't stint his appetite, making serious inroads on our allowance for the month. Then he joined us on our escapade, hunting with us for fully 3 hours, helping us to climb the trees and even going up himself. On return home, Mother asked after Mrs. Malagna and questioned us about confession. We were thinking up something to say when Pinzone, with the most brazen face in the world, told the whole story of our day without omitting one detail. The punishments we inflicted for this and similar treachery never won us a decisive armistice, though the tricks we played on him were not wanting in a certain devilish ingenuity. Just before supper time, for instance, Pinzone would wait for the bell by taking a little nap on the couch in our front hall. One evening of a wash day, we had been put to bed early for some prank or other. We got up, filled a squirt gun with water from the wash, stealthily crept up to him, and nearly let it full in the nostrils. The jumpy game took him nearly to the ceiling. What we learned with such a teacher can readily be imagined, though it was not his fault. Pinzone had a certain erudition among the classic poets, and I, who was much more impressionable than Berto, managed to memorize a goodly number of verses, especially charades and the Baroque poetry of old. I could recite so many of these that Mother was convinced we were both progressing very well. Aunt Scholastica, for her part, wasn't deceived, and she made up for the failure of her plans for Pomino by trying to set Berto and me in order. We knew we had Mother on our side, however, and paid no attention to her. So angry was she at this scorn of her interest in us that I'm sure she would have given us both the thrashing of our lives had she been able to ever do so without Mother's knowing. One day, when she was leaving the house in a rage as usual, she happened to encounter me in one of the deserted rooms. I remember that she seized me by the chin, and tightening her fingers till it hurt, she said, "Mamma's little darling, Mamma's little darling." And then she lowered her face till her eyes were looking straight into mine, and a sort of stifled bellow escaped her. "If you were mine, oh, if you were mine." I can't understand why she had it in for me especially. I was a model pupil for Pinzone as compared to Berto. It may have been the rather innocent face for which I'd always been noted, an innocence accentuated rather than not by the pair of big round glasses they had fitted to my nose to discipline one of my eyes, which preferred to choose, independently of the other, the objects it would look at. Those glasses were the plague of my life, and the moment I escaped from the authority of my elders, I threw them away, restoring a longed-for autonomy to the oppressed member. As I viewed the matter, I was never destined to be wonder for good looks, even with both eyes straight. Why go to all the trouble, then? I was in good health. Never mind painting the lily. By the time I was 18, a red curly beard had come to monopolize most of my face, to the peculiar disadvantage of a mere dot of the nose, which had tended to lose its bearings somewhat between the fulsome thicket and spacious clearing of a rather impressive brow. How comforting it would be if we could only choose noses to match our faces. Imagine a man with enormous proboscis quite out of keeping with lean, wizened features. To such a man I would have said, "Look here, friend, you have a nose that just suits me. Let's exchange. It will be the advantage of both of us." For that matter, I could have improved in the selection of many other parts of my physique, but I soon understood that any radical betterment was out of the question. I grew reconciled to the face the Lord gave me, and dismissed the matter from my mind. Brother Roberto, on the contrary, was not so easily distracted. As compared with me, he was a handsome, well-built lad, and unfortunately, he knew it. He would spend hours in front of a mirror, combing his hair and dandying up in every way. He invested a mint of money in neckties, linen, and other articles of dress. On one occasion he angered me with the fuss he made over a new evening suit for which he had bought a white velvet waistcoat. To spite him, I put the thing on one morning and went hunting in it. The mole, meantime, wasn't idle. Every season Malagna would come around complaining of the bad crops and getting Mother's consent to a new mortgage he was forced to take out. Now it would be repairs on the buildings, now additional drainage for the field, now the extravagance of the boys. A visit from him meant the certain announcement of another catastrophe. One year a frost, as he said, ruined our olive groves on the shore acres. Then the phylloxera destroyed our vineyards, the spur. To import American roots, immune from this plague of the vines, we were obliged to sell one farm, and then a second, and then a third. Mother was sure that someday Malagna would find our pond at the coops dried up. As for Berto and me, I suppose we did spend more money than was wise or necessary, but that doesn't alter the fact that Battista Malagna was the meanest swindler that ever disgraced the surface of the planet. Words more severe than these I could not charitably use towards a man who eventually became a relative of mine by marriage. So long as Mother was alive, Malagna was allowed to feel no discomforts. Indeed, he put no limit to our caprices and expenditures, but that was just a blind to conceal the abyss into which, on my mother's death, I alone was to be plunged. I alone, because Berto was shrewd enough to make a profitable marriage in good season, whereas my marriage... I ought to say something about my marriage, oughtn't I, Don Eligio? Don Eligio's up on his ladder again, continuing his inventory. He looks around and calls back. Your marriage? Of course. The idea. Avoiding everything improper, to be sure. Improper? That's a good one. You know very well that Don Eligio laughs, and all this little deconsecrated church laughs with him. Then he continues, If I were you, Signor Pascal, I'd take a peep at Boccaccio or Bandello in passing. That would sort of get you into the spirit of the thing. Don Eligio's always talking about the spirit of the thing, the tone, the flavor, the style. Who does he think I am? D'Annunzio? Not if I can help it. I'm putting the thing down just as it was, and it's all that I can do at that. I was never cut out to be a literary fellow, but having once begun my story, I may as well continue, I suppose.